Hello?
Yeah, yes,
Yeah, hi Suresh.
yeah, hi. I'm calling for
Uh,
TCS for technical evaluation.
yeah, okay. Yeah,
Can I go ahead?
yeah, sure. So is it for which project?
This is like a banking project.
Okay.
Can you tell me about yourself?
I have around 9.7 years of experience in .NET. Like I worked in .NET Web Forms, MVC, Web API, and .NET Core API. On the front end side, like I worked on Angular and Vue.js. On the cloud side, like I worked on Azure services like the blob storage service bus, Redis Cache, Key Vault, and Azure CI/CD pipelines for deployment.
What is your previous company?
It is NEC Software Solution.
Okay, where it is?
It is in Mumbai.
Okay, fine. So ASP.NET, how many years you have worked on?
So entire experience into .NET only.
No,
9.7.
only ASP.NET. How many projects?
So you mean to say web forms and VC like that?
Uh, ASP.NET, ASPX forms.
Basically, web forms have worked around 8 months on that. Just
Okay.
completed 2 projects.
Okay, fine. So do you know all the concepts of web forms, right?
Uh, frankly speaking, like I don't really remember like
Okay. Okay. So MVC, how many years you have worked on?
2.5.
So the recent project MVC, or is there other technology?
Sorry?
The recent project you worked with MVC?
No. It is on .NET Core API
Okay.
and front end it is Vue.js.
Okay, Vue.js.
Yeah.
So .NET Core, what is different between .NET and .NET Core?
Uh, The main difference is like the .NET Core comes as an open source and like it supports the Linux environment as well. So we can deploy the apps developed using the .NET Core in the Linux environment. That's the major difference, and it is an open source. And it has like if it comes to the architectural point of view, like .NET Core comes with the Kestrel server, which can be used to deploy onto the Linux environment using the reverse proxy server, that is Apache server or in front.
Okay. What is the role of startup class?
Startup class is the class that like it is a bootstrap class. That whenever the application loads, then at that time that class get called. And in that class, we have the configure services and the configure method. In configure service, we consider all the services that we are going to use in our application. And also, in the configure method, we configure all the middleware. Um, Whatever middleware we want to execute as a part of a request response pipeline, we mention it over there.
Okay. So configure services and configure method role.
Sorry?
Configure service and configure method role.
Yeah.
Can you tell me
So
what was that?
the configure service method in that service, in the configure service method, we can configure all the services that will be used by our application. Like we can have the DI container, the registrations in that, and we can enable the MVC, add MVC, and we can do the authentication as well, token-based authentication, and all those we can do in the configure service. In the configure method, we can configure the pipeline middleware that will be executed as a part of the request response pipeline. So we can by default inbuilt middlewares like authentication, authorization, and if you are using the logger, you can add the logging as well. And if you have any custom middlewares also, we can add those middlewares in that particular configure method.
Okay. What is the dependency injection?
Dependency injection, like we can add. Dependency injection is like we can inject the instances of a classes that are being used inside a class. So like let's say like what it solves is it is a loosely coupled. So the classes that are used inside will use the interfaces, and at the real time the classes that are implemented will be injected. So the code is loosely coupled, and we can change the implemented class at any time, but the class that is using will be unknown, and will require no changes in that.
Okay. What is the difference between app and app use?
Sorry?
App.run and app.use.
We can use that like configure method has the two parameters, I application builder, using which we can add more middlewares to our request response pipeline. So app.use is like it will add a pipeline, add a new middleware to the pipeline. Even run also adds it, but the thing is like run is if we add a middleware using the run method, then it will be the last pipeline in the middleware. Sorry, last middleware in the pipeline.
What? Tell me the services in.
Sorry?
Services. Services lifetimes in .NET Core.
So in the .NET Core, the BI container has a different lifespan, that the instances that we can create. So we have a singleton, transient, and scope. So the singleton is like if you create an instance of a class, then that single instance will be available and shared throughout the application lifetime. Whereas in the scope, so when I say scope, like if you have in one request it is the three classes are being instantiated, and three classes uses the same object, then same object. So it is per request one object is created and shared across the three classes. And in the case of the transient, so in one request, in one request, it will create the three instances for the three classes. So it is per class, it will have a new instance.
Okay. So .NET Core Azure will support?
Sorry?
Azure it will support .NET Core?
Yeah. So currently, like we have in the previous organization, like we were hosting those applications onto the Azure Web App Services. So we can select in the configuration, in the general settings, we mention what type of a web app it is. We can mention over there the framework.
How routing will work in our ASP.NET Core?
In the .NET Core, like in the APIs, like what I have used is a attribute-based routing. So on each of the controller and the action, we used to mention the root. So on the controller, we used to mention the controller name, and on the action, we used to mention the action name. So whenever the application starts, then these roots are read and inserted into the root table. And whenever the request comes in, then it is mapped onto the root table to pass the control to the particular controller and action.
How to validate in model?
Sorry.
How to validate in model? Models, how you will validate?
So in the model, like, we can create a model and we can have a data annotations on that particular model. Uh, uh, so like if it is required or max length and all those we can mention on the properties of that particular model. And when on the post data we can check whether the model is valid or not.
Okay. How will prevent cross-site request forgery?
uh, Cross type. So in the course we can mention like what from which domain we can accept the request. So the course in the course we can mention allow like allow origin. In the origin we can mention if it is from particular domain or not. Uh,
Okay. So you have worked on Azure also.
yeah,
So in Azure, have you created a pipeline?
yeah. I have created a pipeline.
Okay. How you will host the project in Azure server?
Sorry, Suresh.
How you will host the project in Azure?
You mean deployment?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what we in our scenario, the repository, code repository was in the Git DevOps only. So for what we have done is like as a part of the pipeline, we have 4 branches for the 4 environments. So we was having 4 environments, and we was having 4 branches. So whenever there is a pull request into this particular branch, we used to trigger like pipeline used to trigger. So we mentioned the trigger details in the trigger section of a CI/CD pipeline, branch name and the code repository name. And once it is triggered, so what it will do is it will pull the code from the repository. And then the next job is like we used to restore the needed packages. And then next will be the build command to build the project. And then afterwards we have a unit test cases. So we used to check all the unit test cases of that particular API project, whether all cases are executing or not. And then we have a publish job, which will publish the code, which will publish the code onto the artifact. And then comes the deployment part. So the deployment part, we used to fetch that artifact, publish file from the artifact, and then we used to stop the Azure web app on which we want to deploy, and then we used to transfer that code, and then we used to restart the web app. So these are the steps.
Okay. Have you used Redis cache?
Sorry,
Redis cache.
Redis caching. Yeah.
Yeah. Which case you are using? How you will doing? Can you tell me?
So Redis cache, like we used to get the connection string for that Redis cache. So we have a primary and secondary key. So we used to use the one of those keys and we used to put it in the config file. And we used to create an instance of the Redis cache, passing these connection string. And we used to like if you want to save any object, then we used to pass that key and the value to that.
Okay. Have you used in blob storage?
Yeah. Lobster.
Yeah. How it will use? Can you tell me?
Just a second. Yes, yeah. So similarly for the blob storage also, like we can we have the primary and secondary connections, and also we can have the fast token as well, signature as well, which will have the more granular control over the scope of what we can access. So we put those the things into the config file, and when we want to get access to the any of the files in the blob storage, we used to create a cloud client. Then we used to have a container client, and then we used to have a particular blob object. So what type of a blob object is it? If it is an append blob or a blob, depending upon the blob, we used to create that blob object, and we can save it, we can modify it, and we can download it.
How you will run functions through Azure?
Run functions like I didn't got from the local machine or from the
Azure. How you trigger the function from Azure?
So Azure functions have different types of trigger, like HTTP trigger. So when we can have the URL and we can trigger the Azure function, and we have other triggers as well, like a blob trigger. So depending if there is any blob changes in the blob storage, we can trigger that event, and we can run some logic in our Azure function and do something. That blob trigger, we have a service bus trigger, and we can have the long running functions as well, like durable functions for which have a orchestrator function and other one function I didn't remember, but like we have all those triggers. We have a time trigger as well, where we can the time periodic time when we want to run that trigger.
Have you worked on queues?
Blob storage queue?
Yeah.
No, I haven't worked. Like just read about it, but haven't. So we can use that queue trigger as well in Azure function.
Yeah.
So Azure blob storage has table storage, blob storage, queue storage, and file storage. 4 things. Like just use the blob storage.
Okay. So Angular, which version you have worked on?
Angular, like I've worked on Angular JS 1.0 and then 2 for around 8 months, and Angular 10 for 4 months.
Okay. What is the new thing in arrive in Angular 10?
Sorry, Suresh, don't have that much knowledge on that differences.
Okay.
Like just like I was like for some time like I was deployed onto the Angular 10 because the resource was not available. But like most of the things like was seeing like we have used RxJS and other things.
Okay. So how many ways we can call the service in Angular?
You can call a service.
Yeah.
Service like so when we declare a service, we can declare whether it is like root scope or it's specific to any particular library, any particular module. So that's configurability we have on the service, and we can inject that service into particular component, and we can make a call to that particular service.
Okay.
So in the service, like we have an injectable decorator on that particular service. So in the
So what is different Angular and Vue.js?
sorry, Suresh.
Angular and Vue.js.
Yeah.
Difference.
So differences. Differences, I would say, Angular, like Vue.js is much lightweighted, whereas in the Angular, like it comes with a lot of inbuilt features. Whereas in the Vue.js, I think if you want something, we need to add it specifically. Angular comes with the HTTP client as well, but in the Vue.js, I think for Axios, we need to add it. We need to add it separately. So I would say like from the developer point of view, if you are like using just the basic functionalities, I think there is not much.
Okay,
Like
what
we
is
have seen,
okay, fine.
yeah,
What is observables and promise function?
yeah, observables and comments like uh, so observables are like it will give a series of values, whereas as a promise is like we can perform any asynchronous operation, and it will result whether it is a it will end it in either with success or with error. Um, and observable is like if we declare an observable and we subscribe to that particular observable, whenever the value is being changed for that particular observable, then the subscriber will get an updated value. But in the case of the promise, it is executed only once, and it will either execute in with success or with the false. So in the inside the promise, we will say it is if everything works fine, we will say resolve, and if there is any error, we will say reject. So people, so accordingly, the promise will be executed.
Okay. So entity framework also worked on, right?
Yeah.
So which approach you will follow? Oh, database or code
Uh,
first or not?
so previously, like I was working on IBM DB database, so I was using database first. Like previously also, like most of the time, like I worked on database first only.
Okay. Can you tell me entity object?
Sorry,
Entity object.
entity object,
Yeah.
DB context, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, so whenever you are using an entity framework, so we add the NuGet packages from the NuGet package console, and then we uh, add it in this configure service. So the entity we will configure the entity service, entity framework.
So what is DB set?
Sorry, Satish. So I was yeah. So we configure the entity framework using passing the connection string to that particular of a particular database. So and we will mention the class that we holding the DB context. So we will create like let's say if it is an employee database. So employee DB context, then it will derive from the class DB context, and we will have a dependency injection of these particular DB context class into the repositories that we will be using. And in the DB context class, we will mention all the entities in that particular database. And for each particular entity, we will have the properties and the relation between each entity. Um, and in the DB context class itself, we have a on configuring method, I think, where we mention the each class, each entity keys, so that whenever we fetch entities, it will differentiate between each of them. That's it, Suresh.
Okay, fine. So in SQL, how to fetch alternate records from table?
SQL,
Yeah.
alternate.
Yeah.
Sorry, Suresh, I didn't work.
Oh,
What in it?
I have a table. There is a records is
Yeah.
there 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I have to fetch 1 and 2 I have to skip, and I have to fetch 3 and 4 skip, 5 fetch, like odd records.
Okay. Um, all records. Uh, I would use. I don't know. Like I can use the row number and then uh, put the case on that, uh, or no. Yeah, row number, and then we can put the where condition where Like
Yeah. Okay, fine. Okay. I'll give my feedback. Is there any question?
I just want to know like for which project and like what will be the role in this project?